What's good, homies? Welcome back to the Drafts and Drafts podcast. I'm Joe, aka Sultan. It is Friday, February 14th. It's Valentine's Day, and what a better way to spend this holiday than with my one true love of late, which is fantasy football. I'm rocking the pink long sleeve, got the red cap on, all decked out for my least favorite holiday. Shouldn't even be a holiday. I think it's stupid, but today, we're going to be walking you through what I think are the ideal settings, rules, regulations, formats needed to start a successful Dynasty League. And even though we have no Dave today, hopefully he pops into the comments and leaves some feedback on some of the things I may have left out or some things that he likes, because I know he is the commissioner of our one QB league that we always talk about. And I think he'd be the first to say that we did a really good job with how we started, especially being 7 years ago now. But there are things that we could do better or could have done better. And there are things that we just absolutely nailed as far as rules go. He could probably speak to some things and shed some light on some things that maybe I don't have in mind. But again, no draft review today, no OTQ. I do have a little glass of red because I want to keep it classy on Valentine's Day. But let's get into the rules. So, what is the most important thing? You know, you're sitting there, you got maybe a handful of friends that want to dabble into Dynasty, or maybe they want to, you have a redraft league that is considering converting to Dynasty. I think that's a totally separate process. Actually, I just thought of that now. That should be an OTQ. Like, what if I have a redraft league and we want to convert to Dynasty? What I would say is do not take your existing rosters and just turn it into a Dynasty, because Dynasty requires a totally different foresight around roster construction than redraft, obviously. But for those of you who might be new and considering it, it is startup season is for the next 3 months. So now's the time to consider it. The number one most important thing to think about is the managers. This is the most important component of the step of forming a Dynasty League, because these are the people that you're going to be spending theoretically eternity with. And it's the life of you don't create a dynasty with the intention of folding it. You create a dynasty with the intent that the league's going to last forever. So these are the people that you're spending forever with. So you want to make sure that they're cool bros, cool chicks, whatever you're in, people that you love and that you want to spend time with and get used to talking to, because they're the people you're going to be texting, negotiating with, making trades with, sending memes to forever. And they're going to also shape and dictate the way your league unfolds as well. It's not just a dictatorship. They should be helping to vote on and add ideas and bring about new settings to. And you want people that are like-minded and similar, that fit your creative vision for the league. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean you got to. Obviously, maybe not everybody has 12 friends that fit the criteria of what you're looking for, but finding that good blend of people that I know are maybe Dynasty diehards, along with people who I know like fantasy football, who are people I think I know are cool. Like, that's the most important thing is make sure you pick your 11 people right. Vet them, interview them if you have to. Like, if you're going to be a casual league, that's fine. Make sure that when you're texting people, you let them know, hey, this isn't going to be a high intensive league. We're only going to be open 8 months out of the year, 6 months out of the year. We're not going to have an intense rookie draft. It's going to be, but just make sure you have all those settings figured out all those ideas figured out before you start talking to people. They're going to help determine the interest level, the commitment level, the investment level of the league. They'll help dictate the pot size, how much they want to actually have the buy-ins to be. They'll dictate, like I said, how long the season's going to run for, the competitiveness level of the league. There are some standards that make a league more fair than others, but that's also less fun. And I use air quotes with the word fun, because not everyone's idea of fun is the same, but there are some levels of randomness that some people may find fun and others may find anti-competitive. So getting those managers down will be important. Same with the experience level. Like in Dave's league, we were lucky. None of us had played in a Dynasty league before. I think A couple guys were in another league. I don't know if that was also the startup for that league or if they had run for a year before. I know that some of the managers had done other fantasy sports like baseball or hockey, and I had done a keeper baseball league. Some other guys had done keeper leagues. I know all of us had done redraft fantasy football before, but it was all of our first time. I think that was kind of helpful that there were no sharks and minnows in our league when we started. And we kind of were on like a level playing field in terms of our prior knowledge ahead of time. So if you're all new or if you have an imbalance of experience level, it may actually be helpful to guide them towards some resources. Not saying that they should be the end all be all. Obviously, you should be doing your own research when it comes to making trades or making draft picks, but using a resource like the Drafts and Drafts podcast or Keep Trade Cut or any of those free services online that help you form an idea in your head before or help validate an idea in your head before sending it off, I think are all helpful for newer managers. And as a commissioner, you should be doing your best to try to level the playing field as much as possible without actually making any moves on other teams' behalf. Because obviously with Dynasty, disparity is part of the nature of Dynasty. Is that you're going to have teams that form juggernauts and teams that become tankers over the years. What you can't have is an imbalance of experience and commitment and knowledge levels where some people just aren't caught up and they just forever are behind the 8 ball. I guess you can, doesn't really matter. But anyways, most important thing is the managers. Next most important thing, the 1B of this is you must have a handbook with clearly defined rules and regulations. This will be your best friend as a commissioner. When in doubt, every single issue that could possibly come up and be controversial to your league should be covered in the handbook. Everything that we're about to talk about should be included in the handbook, as well as a repository of all the managers and their contact info and their team names and their sleeper usernames. One place where all of your other managers can go to find out all the info about the other managers they can without having to ask questions like, hey, who's the 617 number? Who's the 903 number? Like, oh no, they should have all that ahead of time and it should be matched to their team name and their league username. All right. So once you have the handbook set up, it should have a list of all the rules and then how rules are added and changed as well. Because we've in the PDFDL, we've gone through a series of changes where we used to have a live vote on a camera on an owners meeting in like where we just casted votes. Hey, yeah, I vote. Dave would throw out a rule and we would just say yes or no. And it was like almost like wisdom of or influence of the crowd where two people would raise their hand, then a third, then a fourth. And it was just, it was a good process. It wasn't the best process. And now we have a pre-meeting poll that goes out where everyone can cast their vote ahead of time. So we know going into the owners meeting what rules are up for debate, what have already been decided on in that pre-meeting poll. If something was unanimously voted for or against, we don't even need to discuss it. Anything in the middle, we leave open for discussion. So some people have rules around having a dictator type move where the commissioner kind of is the sole holder of all the rules and no rules can be changed. That's fine. Like if somebody's like, hey, I know what's best in the league, I don't need anybody else's input. That's cool. Some people have a committee where they'll have the commissioner and two other people that are not the commissioner. They're bipartisan that help, or a 3-person committee that almost creates a check and balance with the commissioner to help vote on rules so that the commissioner isn't making unilateral decisions without the approval of the committee, but doesn't necessarily require the entirety of the league to agree on something. You just need to get 2 members of the committee to agree. I think that's a cool way to do it. You have to have obviously 3 more committed managers than the rest of the league. But yeah, so the first thing we're going to talk about here is, well, the first thing beyond those top 2 are like the most important, but they're not actually related to the building of your dynasty. Those are just the, I guess, prerequisites. Like, get your handbook in order. I can link you guys to mine. I can share it if you guys ever want. Just comment handbook in the comments and I'll send it. And figure out the 12 managers you want to have. From there, since we're covering it, the first thing is league size. I mean, 10 is the absolute minimum number of managers I think to make a successful dynasty league, but I still think 10 team leagues are just like phony. The supply and demand of skill players is so minimal down. The depth required is so little that every manager's trying to do the same thing. Everyone's trying to combine, George Pickens and Zay Flowers to go get Jamar Chase. Or everyone's trying to tier up. There is no other strategy than tier up. Combine a first and Devon Achane and go get Bijan Robinson. Like there is no, let me go break this superstar up into multiple pieces and try to build out a healthy rock. Nope, everything is about superstars. So I think 12 is ideal. I've never played in a 14-team league, and I think it would be fun. The hard part is it's already difficult enough to get 12 managers to agree on dates and rule changes and pay their league dues and attend a draft. Adding 2 more managers to the fold would just be a nightmare, and it makes it more of a headache for if there's ever turnover. If it's already hard enough to worry about if you lose one of 11 managers, that's like a 10% chance every year, 9% chance every year that you're going to lose a manager. 14 teams, that math doesn't work out, but that math doesn't make any sense. But there's just more managers that you could lose every year, so it just makes it tougher to think about replacing managers. But 14 would definitely add scarcity to certain positions. It would make quarterback and tight end a lot healthier in a 1-quarterback league, and it would make Superflex almost impossible to play. It would be, you could still play obviously, but now quarterback position would dry up for that Superflex slot, and barely anyone would have bye week quarterbacks unless they lucked their way into replacement quarterbacks. The next bullet I have here on the list of settings is the figuring out the cost of the league and the payout structure. Immediately, your league should have a buy-in of sorts. It should cost money to play. Free leagues are a waste of time. No one takes them seriously. No one checks those leagues. No one's concerned about the future. No one's concerned. If anything, people use those to test, to limit test theory, saying, well, what if I just trade all my picks away and try to win a ship in year 1? How fun would that be? Oh, there's no skin in the game. Why not try it? And I think personally, the more money, the better, as it forces people to take it more seriously, less chance people leave the league when they're pot invested. And the more people are willing to think about downstream ramifications of their league, knowing they're going to be playing for a lot longer. Once you've figured out a buy-in price, call it $100. It's important to figure out what's the champ payout going to be every year, because it's a dynasty league. You want to make it worthwhile. And at the same breath, because it's a dynasty league, the teams at the top tend to stay at the top for a sustained period of time. The teams at the bottom tend to stay at the bottom for a sustained period of time. So you don't necessarily need a top-heavy pot to reward good dynasty teams. You can have a league payout where it's like 40% of the pot goes to the champ, 30% to or 20% to second, 10% to third, some rewarded to regular season champ, some rewarded to you can break it up however you want, because the best teams are going to get rewarded in the long run by repeatedly making deep playoff runs. In Dave's league, we've had 6 seasons go down. We've had 3 different teams win those 6 championships. So it's multiple championships for multiple teams. We've had essentially the same exact 5 teams have made the Final Four in Dave's league just about every single year, except for like 3 teams ever. So that's 24 teams that have made the Final Four. Of the 24 teams, there's only been 5 teams that have been there for all 24 of those occurrences. So it's like those people are consistently raking in some sort of payout, whether it's their money back plus in the third place game, or they're making the championship and getting, 3 times their buy-in, or they're winning a championship. So you don't necessarily have to have a top-heavy pot. I personally am still a fan of, you pay the teams that win the championship. It emulates real life. I think that's most fun, but just keep that in mind. Come up with my rule of thumb is 60-30-10. 60% for first, 30% for second, 10% for third. So you get a little bit more than your buy-in back when you come in third place. And it helps incentivize people who have basically incentivizes people to play all season long. Because I hate when in any fantasy sport, when come 70-80% of the way through the season, if I'm eliminated from playoffs and I have nothing else to play for, I'm like, well, this stinks. I would love to keep making transactions and setting my lineups and having a reason to watch the games, but if there's nothing to play for, there's no sneak into playoffs and make a third place run. There's no consolation bracket. There's no regular season points, weekly reward. It just kind of takes the fun out of it. So I like giving people a reason to play for the duration of the season. Some people like doing weekly awards, like the highest score of the week gets $5 every week. So that ends up being like, 70 extra bucks out of the pot goes to regular season points. I don't like that's to me, that's kind of lame. It's like, I'm not going to be excited to get $5 this week or $10 this week because my team went off. Like, who gives a shit? Like, I'd rather just have it go towards the champ. Regular season number 1 seed maybe gets a payout, or the regular season most points gets a payout. Again, in most leagues, the top 6 teams make playoffs, meaning the 1 seed gets a bye. That's already reward enough. You're already in a 25% chance, or like 60% chance of you just winning money. All you have to do is win your first round, your semifinal matchup, or if you lose, you win the third place game and you get your money back. So getting a bye basically guarantees you a really good odds at winning money. So I don't think rewarding them additional money for coming in first or getting a bye is worth it. One thing I think is cool is something that I implemented in our Superflex League. It's kind of a hybrid version of an Empire League. So an Empire League is where when a team goes back-to-back or wins 3 championships, they win the Empire pot and the league resets. I don't like the league resetting, so that's not part of my league, but we do have an Empire pot. So our league buy-in is $150, but everyone pays an extra $10 towards an Empire pot. And the first team that repeat champs back-to-back years or wins 3 championships will take down the Empire pot. We're now going into year 4. Nobody has repeated yet, so we are at an Empire pot of $480 right now, which would be, at this point now, that's about half the pot for the champion. So we're getting there. We had 3 different champs in the first 3 years. Obviously now that means only 1 team can win the Empire pot this year, and now hopefully it encourages everybody to kind of try to take down the champ, and maybe it encourages the champ to make some riskier trades to try to win a championship this year, forego some future value to say, if I can take down the Empire pot, like that would be awesome. The last thing to consider here is to collect dues for trading away future picks up front. Now, in my leagues, because they're both home leagues, if you trade away a future pick, you pay 50% of the future league dues, because I trust all the guys in the league that if they're going to leave, they're going to give me a heads up. They're not going to be scumbags about it. They're not going to destroy their team and leave. But I still want that 50% league due, so that if in the event someone's like, hey, man, Joe, listen, like, I'm sorry, my team's gone to shit and I just can't keep up with this anymore. Like, went to shit for a reason. I can't keep up. I'm going to have to leave the league. It's like, okay, great. No worries. But now I can use the 50% league dues to entice a new manager to take over a team at half cost. So instead of paying $150 to take over a dog shit team next year, maybe they only have to pay $75 because the previous manager already paid in a little bit. I already have, it's a home league, so I have a bunch of friends who want to play in our league because they're, either they know other people in the league and they've asked, hey, when there's an opening, let me know. I'd be happy to take over a team. And if they want, they can buy that team outright from the other manager for full price. Or if a manager has to leave, now I have at least 50% league dues for that year if they traded away their first round pick. Now, if you're playing in a league with degenerates and strangers and randoms, they should be paying 100% of the cost of any pick they trade away in the future. So if right now somebody trades away a 2027 second, that manager should pay 100% of that 2027 year's league due, just in case they were to leave the league. The new manager should have that year for free. So, all right, moving on to the lineup settings. I do think there is quite a few different lineup settings that you can go through, and I don't think any of them are superior. I mean, I do think some are superior, but I don't think any of them are must-haves or must-not plays. Well, I do think I should take that back. I already fucking lied. The first debate you should decide on, because I think it's the most influential to the way your startup draft and the rest of your settings will unfold, is whether it will be one quarterback or Superflex. For those of you who are mostly just redraft players, Superflex probably seems like a novelty, but Superflex is actually the more dominant Dynasty league nowadays in terms of almost every bit of content I ever see on YouTube or hear on podcasts related to Dynasty is based on Superflex. And the only people who don't, I think, is the ballers who still cater to a one quarterback league audience. And I think actually CBS does too. And those are probably the two biggest podcasts. So what do I know? But Superflex is where you have, in addition to your QB slot, you have a flex slot where you can play a quarterback, wide receiver, running back, or tight end. So that means that at any one point in time, you can play two quarterbacks. And that means quarterbacks are the most valuable position in the entire league because they score on average, 20% more than any other position on the field, even the number one players. So that distinct decision right there will be useful because in a one quarterback league, the lineups tend to be shallower and the value for quarterbacks is so much lower. And I think that's a little bit disappointing because quarterback is arguably the most important position in all of sports. And I feel like that should be kind of reflected in Superflex in your fantasy leagues, because in Superflex, it creates this cool dynamic where all of a sudden these mediocre quarterbacks by fantasy standards, like your Dak Prescotts and your Brock Purdy and Jared Goff and Baker Mayfield of previously, all those guys go from waiver wire fodder to like very, very valuable, important pieces that are worth just as much as guys like Devontae Smith and T. Higgins, or even more than those guys, which sounds crazy when it's said out loud. But the fact that you can throw in Brock Purdy to get you 17 points a game minimum in your lineup, or T. Higgins that'll give you maybe 13 or 14, is a huge advantage to have in your Superflex slot. In a startup draft in a regular dynasty league, a one quarterback, the first quarterback might not go till round 2 or 3. And there might only be 5 quarterbacks taken in the first 6 rounds. Whereas in Superflex, you might see 5 quarterbacks taken with the first 5 picks. So it really is going to change the dynamic of the way the league is structured. And I think it's a really cool format because it creates a lot more flexibility around building your roster, especially because quarterback also has the longest horizon for a career and fantasy production window. It allows for such cool roster construction where you can say, yeah, okay, I can save 6 years by getting Jane Daniels instead of Lamar Jackson, but is it really worth it? Like, because Lamar is so good and he's scoring 6-7 points more per game than Jane Daniels. Like, is it really worth tearing down to save 5 years? Whereas like at running back, going from Saquon to Gibbs would be unbelievable because Saquon might have a year or 2 left. Gibbs has 5. Like the trade-off is so much different, and the top players having such longer playing horizons, I think really helps the health of a dynasty league like that. The next is deciding on just how many roster spots you want to have and lineup spots you want to have that are scoring points. So like in our one quarterback league, we were a start 7 plus kickers and defenses for the longest time. And we just finally added another flex last year or 2 years ago. So now we're at a start 8 skill positions plus kicker plus defense. And that is still so shallow. It's 96 starting skill players. That's a crazy shallow lineup. Like it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but I've seen some super flex lineups where it's start 11, start 12, start 13. Like start 10 is the standard in a dynasty super flex league, where you do get a lot of playing time out of guys like Romeo Dubes will play for you, and Jacoby Myers is a regular starter in those leagues. Whereas like, as for those of you who are just one quarterback, 10 team or 12 team league start 7s, those guys are borderline waiver fodder because you're like, I can get 12 points per game out of anyone. I'm going to take a shot on Jameson Williams, who could score me 28 this week. Or I'm going to take a shot on, Christian Watson. I don't want the average steady players. I want the boomer bust guys who could pop off. I think the lineup depth that you use will dictate trading strategies. If you have a deep starting lineup, you're going to see people gravitate more towards potentially splitting up their top assets, especially in rebuilds. You can't afford to hold a guy like Jonathan Taylor through a rebuild right now. If you realize right now, hey, I need to rebuild, you can't hold Jonathan Taylor because he's 25 years old, 26. And if you're not competitive again for 2 more years, like you have to break him up into multiple pieces because the time to turn around your team takes so much longer, the deeper your lineups are. Whereas in a one quarterback league, it just takes hitting one superstar in the rookie draft to propel your team back up to being competitive. If you picked Brian Thomas with your first pick and then Ladd McConkey with your second pick this past year, You went from a 0 to probably one of the top teams in your league overnight. If you picked up Puka Nacua and drafted Bijan 2 years ago, your team went from bottom of the league to top of the league like that in a start 7. So the parity in the league gets flipped much quicker in a shallower lineup, which may be fun for some, but also doesn't reward active management or research as much when you have a short starting lineup. The last things I would say is absolutely no defenses. I've played with them now in both my dynasties, and I just don't think they make sense in a dynasty league. A defense is a collection of players. There's a finite number of them. Not that anyone's ever tried a defensive horde before, but they're not predictable. They're just a random number generator at the bottom of your lineup. Like, of course, there are certain teams that are better than others over the course of a season, but they're so unpredictable year over year and over the course of a few seasons. And it's not like we scout defensive players. Of course, if you want to do IDP and individual defensive players, by all means, go ahead. It's just not for me. I only have so much bandwidth, and I spend enough of it on running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and quarterbacks. I don't need to add individual defensive players to the fold too. And then absolutely no kickers. Like, I've played enough to just realize I don't care if it's part of the game. We play fantasy for a reason. It's fantasy. It's different scoring, different. Never once has a kicker been drafted with a rookie pick. Never once has a kicker been traded, or if they were traded, it was a meme. No one scouts kickers. No one wants that random number generator at the bottom of their lineup unless you just truthfully are more for a casual. It's fun. It's quirky. But if you care about rewarding research and active management and people who take Dynasty seriously, and the whole point of Dynasty is kind of to try to reward those managers who build a good team and say, wow, you built such a good team this year. You know what? You can keep it next year. And then to have some of that thwarted by the randomness that is kickers, especially in a shallow lineup, it just seems like it flies in the face of what a dynasty league is supposed to kind of reward. And again, you decide for yourself. You guys love the randomness of streaming kickers and scouting for dome games and looking for, kickers who are playing in non-windy stadiums and love the active management on the waivers. By all means, go ahead. But the fact that defenses and kickers get dropped on their bye weeks instead of rostered in Dynasty is just shows that they have no value and therefore shouldn't be influencing the outcome of games or seasons. Next one I want to talk about here is your bench settings. You want to establish, obviously, how many players you want on your bench. I think the rule of thumb for lineup and bench plus taxi is about 1.5 times your lineup size should be your bench size. So if you start 10, you should have about 10 to 15 bench plus taxi, whether that's 11 plus 4, 10 plus 5, 13 plus 3. Now, a taxi squad is just a free set of bench slots that are reserved for early in career players. Think of it as your minor league system almost. So the way the taxi squad works on Sleeper is you can set whether taxi is designated for rookies only, or you can change it to rookies and sophomores, or you can change it to players who've been in the league for up to 3 seasons. And they can get stashed on taxi in addition to your bench, but they cannot be taken off taxi once it locks. Or they can, but they can't be put back on. So it's like a free minor league system, but once you call them up to your bench, they have to stay there. So what it's really meant to do is to stash players that you think are more project or prospective players. Like, you're not drafting Bijan Robinson or Ken Walker or Marvin Harrison or Malik Neighbors and throwing them on taxi. Like, those guys are hitting your lineup on a regular basis. They don't need to be on your taxi. What you're trying to do is you're trying to stash Michael Penix. You draft Michael Penix. You say, well, he's probably not going to play this year, but I don't want him taking up a valuable bench spot, so I'm going to throw him in my taxi, let him marinate for a year. J.J. McCarthy gets hurt in preseason. You throw him in your taxi. You throw these guys in there, you let them sit. It just gives you more bench flexibility without saying, I'm wasting bench spots on guys that are never going to play for me. It adds value to your 3rd and 4th round rookie picks. When you don't have a taxi slot, your 4th round rookie picks end up getting dropped midseason because you're like, Dylan Lobby has touched the ball one time and he fumbled it. I don't need to hold him when I can go pick up Zach Ertz, which Zach Ertz probably shouldn't be on waivers in most dynasties anyways, but there are situations where some older guys are getting playing time because of injuries, whether it's Tutu Atwell or, some other old crusty bum like, Xavier Hutchinson, who's not old and crusty, but like these types of guys emerge on waivers as a potential, and you're like, well, this guy's playing this week. Do I pick him up or do I drop Lobby? If Lobby's on your tax, you don't need to worry about it. So that's kind of how I view the bench. And then your IR, which is your injured reserve. Dave just switched our rule to be unlimited IR slots. My leagues was always 2 IR slots, and this past year I just bumped it to 4, which I think is a little bit healthier because you shouldn't be forced to cut any players ever in Dynasty. Like, the whole point of Dynasty is you scout all the players, you collect them, you put them on your team, and you can watch them develop or grow or progress at your own pace. You shouldn't have to drop any of them to make room for other players. Moving on, let's go to scoring settings. So obviously you've got your rosters sizes picked out. Now again, some of these categories are going to be commingled in terms of maybe if you're going to change your touchdown scorings on passing touchdowns, maybe you don't need to go to Superflex, or maybe you want to change add a third wide receiver slot because your quarterbacks are doing so much damage. And it's like your scoring settings are going to influence your roster settings and vice versa. But again, these are all separate categories in the end. And kind of what I just touched on, one of the most important ones is our passing touchdown is going to be worth 4 points or 6 points or 5 points. I play in a 5-point pass touchdown league. I think it's a healthy balance of the two, but it just goes to reward those quarterbacks who are more prolific passers. Whereas, traditionally we said touchdowns are bumped down from 6 to 4 in the original game because in a non-PPR, like a standard league that fantasy used to be, quarterbacks would score 18, 20, 24 points at 6-point passing touchdowns, 28 points, 30 points. And running backs and wide receivers were scoring like 9, 10, 11. It just made quarterbacks so ridiculously overweighted that they took down the 4-point pass. But with the advent of PPR leagues, I think passing touchdowns should go back to 6 or at least 5. Like, I think 4-point passing touchdowns are kind of a way of the past. But if you're in a half-point PPR, then 4-point is fine. But that leads to the next one decision to make, which is what should your receptions be worth? I'm of the opinion that I like points. Points are fun. And the more ways you can score points is more fun as long as it's calculable. I don't want to have a tough time watching a game and figuring out how many points my guys are scoring. I want to be able to say, oh, holy shit, that was a 22.8 point play. A 18-yard catch. Easy to add up. Oh, a touchdown, 18-yard touchdown. That's 8.8 points. It's really easy to do in the fight. Now, if we were adding in points per pass attempt and bonuses and first down points, I know it's helpful, but I think it's actually makes it more confusing than anything. I'm personally not a fan of all those bonuses, but figure out if you want to go no points per reception, half point per reception, or full point per reception. The other option here is some sort of tiered reception bonuses where I've seen leagues where like running backs get a half point per reception, wide receivers get a full point, and tight ends get 1.5 points to kind of try to balance out the value or the value of each position. I've also played in leagues that are just straight up tight end premium, where everyone gets a point per reception, but a tight end gets an extra half point. It's actually what we're moving to in Dave's league next year. I'm excited to see how that shakes out. These are all decisions to make. Like, I think tight end premium actually does help a little bit, add more flexibility to how you set your lineup and fill your flex spots, and as well as how you invest at the position. In a standard where all tight ends get the same amount of points as receivers, you may say, I don't want to invest in tight end. I think they're worthless. But in a league where tight ends get extra points, like maybe you say, I want to go after those top tier tight ends because I think they give you more of an advantage over the middle of the pack. One thing I didn't mention earlier was a 2 tight end league. I've never played in one, but I've looked at what that would mean in terms of who's tight end 24 would be. And I'm sorry, I don't want to ever have to be starting the likes of Chigakonkwo and Pat Fryer. Like, that would just make me want to blow my head off. I don't want to be starting Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper. Like, I'm relying on both Pat's tight ends. Like, no freaking thank you. The last one is, yards are pretty standard. 0.1 point for return for all rushing, receiving yards. But one thing that I've toyed with is the idea of getting kick return yards. And in Dave's league, we actually do. I think we do the same scoring on kick return yards as passing yards. So every 100 yards is 2.5 points, which is cool because it does add a little bit of a floor to those guys that do both. Like, I can't think of anyone from this past year, but I know a couple years ago, it was like Isaiah Pacheco had like 600 return yards. So once a game, you're getting an extra, call it point and a half added to your total. It's not a lot, but it's a cool little bump. And maybe we could even benefit from expanding that to being every 10 yards is a point, where you might see certain guys that are return specialists be giving you 67, 6, 7, 8 point floors plus a touchdown. Plus, if they get any burn on offense, they become a flex option. I don't know. Might be worth talking about. But okay, now you've ironed out all of your starting lineup spots and your scoring positions. Now it's time to get to the startup draft format. So, hold on. In the startup draft, you're going to have to decide, first and foremost, do you want to do a snake or an auction? Now, the snake draft, that's probably the one most of you are familiar with. It's your standard. You pick at the one slot, you pick the first pick of the first round, 12th pick of the second round, first pick of the third round, 12th pick of the fourth round. It just snakes back and forth. In the last couple of years, for me at least, I learned of a format that includes third round reversal, where in the third round, the draft order reverses. So if you're the first overall pick of the draft, you get the first pick of round 1, the 12th pick of round 2. And then instead of picking the first pick of round 3, it actually reverses again back to the beginning. And now you have the 12th pick of round 3 and then the first pick of round 4. So in round 3, the order reverses. And I think it's actually, someone did the math out around the average pick you get when you do a third round reversal, and it actually helps even out the parity of the league by doing this. So why do a snake draft over an auction? Well, the pros are there's so much more content out there on how to navigate a startup draft. That's a snake draft. And there's plenty of more content out there around like mid-draft trade values and pick values and how to tier down from certain areas of the draft and collect future draft capital and whatever you want to do. And there's way more league parity in a snake. There's no way to butcher your team in the startup in a snake draft without trading. If you stick and pick at your position and take loosely pick players near your ADP, your team's going to come out okay, but it's also going to be very similar to everyone else in your league. And if you guys don't make trades, it's going to make for a very, I wouldn't call it boring. I'd say it's kind of exciting, but it's going to make for, most of the teams being fairly even by the end of the draft. Now, the cons are that you're technically confined to your draft position, and no matter what, you don't really have access to building a team how you want to build it. If you think there's an advantage to saying, I don't want any of the first 2 or 3 rounds worth of players, they're too valuable relative to the rounds 4, 5, and 6. I'd rather have 7 or 8 guys in round 4 and 5 than my top 3 picks. You don't really have a chance to do that without trading down to the 4th and 5th, like you would have in an auction where you can actually just bid on the players you want, and you don't need to worry about what pick number you have. In that same breath, if you do a startup draft that's a snake, but you use a slow clock, you effectively have an auction of sorts at all times because you can trade around the board at any time, and you can trade up to get 101 and 102 and draft Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson and have the most stacked superflex QB room possible. Or you can trade down and collect future picks and start your tank in year 1. And there's a million different ways to do it. You don't necessarily need to do an auction to get access to lineup flexibility, but you do need to use a slow clock if you want to do that. And by slow clock, I mean, instead of your draft pick taking 1 minute to 2 minutes, like most drafts take, most of you who are new to Dynasty, you probably pick on a 1 minute clock and you get your whole draft done in one night. But the standard is really having like an 8 to 12 hour pick clock or even 24-hour pick clock. And the draft takes 2 to 3 weeks to finish, and people are going to bitch. But at the end of the day, a slow clock leads to way more pick strategy, way more trading, way more research to be done when you get to those middle rounds. And you're like, I don't really know who to take here and who to pair them with. And you get to realize that, all my guys are over 27 years old. Maybe I should lean into taking a guy like Travis Kelce in the 10th round or Christian McCaffrey in the 6th round or Derrick Henry in the 7th round instead of Jaden Reed or, Xavier Legette or whatever the guys that might go in those same proximities. You say, maybe it's not worth going for these young guys who may take a year or 2 to develop while my Deebo Samuel and Calvin Ridley are aging out. They don't really mesh together. So you can kind of build a team more thoughtfully with a slow clock. But the good thing about a quick clock is it can be done in person. It can be done in one night, and you can treat it as an event, which is what you guys will soon realize in Dynasty leagues, it's almost sometimes it's hard to get everyone excited for Dynasty because there's no big event anymore. Once you've done the startup and gone through a season, like you add maybe 3 or 4 more players to your team in the offseason through the rookie draft. And of course, like the rookie draft is exciting, but it's not as exciting as a startup. And there's just less events in the dynasty landscape to get excited about. So having a draft all in one night as an event is something I can certainly appreciate, but I'm of the opinion that a slow clock is far superior of a format. And, the other benefit of an auction, which I didn't talk about, the cons of the auction beyond just the fact that you can have a somewhat of an auction through a slow clock snake draft is that they tend to be more complicated because not everybody knows how to do auctions or have done auctions before. And because they're less common, there are less resources for you to kind of ground yourself to. Like, at least in a snake, you have an ADP. Of course, in an auction, you can have these auction value calculators, but how much more percentage over how much inflation is running rampant in my room? Like, there are certain strategies like this. Like, what's the minimum bid? How much should I save in my ammunition so I can play big stack at the end of a draft and take whatever players I want when you get to, filling out the bottom of your roster? It's really easy to ruin your team in an auction draft. It's really hard to ruin your team in a snake. So now that we've talked about the draft formats, time to figure out when you're going to hold your draft. There's basically 3 options. You can do it before the NFL draft, after the NFL draft, or do it close to the season. If you're going to do your draft before the NFL draft, you should include kickers in your draft as placeholders for rookie picks so you can have a separate rookie draft. If you're going to do it after the NFL draft, you can just include the rookies in your startup draft in the player pool. And then if you're going to do it right after the rookie draft or around the rookie draft, it's kind of exciting because it rewards some research a little bit more than if you wait, because it gives people the opportunity to say, oh, I'm paying attention to running back rooms. I'm paying attention to new coaching staffs. I'm paying attention to draft capital and saying, oh, this running back got drafted to this team, but he's only behind, Derrick Henry. And if Henry were to get banged up, this guy's an easy chance to jump to the RB2 on that team. I'm going to take him ahead of a guy that maybe gone to a situation where he's the 3rd running back, but he went earlier in the NFL draft. So it gives some reward, but obviously if you do it closer to the season, you'll have more information on training camps and preseason games and injuries so that, maybe doing your startup in mid-August, late August is maybe more fair, but it's less fun, I would say. Okay, let's move on to, since we're talking about it, I'm going to move down to the rookie draft. Because we just talked about when your startup draft is, the other important draft that you're going to have every year is your rookie draft. And that is the rookie-only portion of the offseason where it usually happens in May or June where teams can add to their dynasty teams. But before you even do, first and foremost, find out early on, how do you and your league mates feel about tanking? Because with every rookie draft, and there comes rookie draft strategy, and tanking is a part of Dynasty, but some people, like myself included, think outright tanking for the sake of benefiting your rookie picks and kind of ruins the integrity of matchups and the integrity of the outcome of the leagues, and it leaves a gray area open for throwing matchups that could be viewed as collusion, even if they're not. And as a commissioner, I try to remove those situations as an option from my leagues. So I like incentivizing teams not to tank or making it so that tanking isn't the dominant strategy. Both of my home leagues don't mind using a lottery system, which kind of thwarts some element of tanking because at the end of the day, it's still just a lottery. So losing that week 13 matchup to get a worse record does nothing because your team gets thrown into the lottery. How your draft order is decided, there's only 2 acceptable ways, in my opinion. The worst way is I've heard of people doing this. They say, oh, the startup draft is in one order, 1 through 12. For the rookie draft, we're going to reverse that and do 12 to 1 as the rookie draft order. That is the least fair, non-equitable way of doing that because the guy who has the 12th pick gets the 101 in the rookie draft. And usually the 101 of a rookie draft is also a first or second round pick. So they basically get a free first or second round startup pick just by picking 112. Like, think about it. Last year, if you were picking 109 in a Superflex league, 111 in a Superflex league, you probably left that draft with some combination of, Kyler Murray and Jamar Chase, and then you also added Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison to that team for free. There was nothing, you did nothing to earn that. Whereas the guy at the 101 got Josh Allen and Breece Hall, and then added Xavier Legette or, Keon Coleman. So, it just was such a huge advantage. Hands down, the least equitable, least fair way to do it. Do not do that way. That is not fun and not fair. Stand on my head on that one. The next one is worst record. This is of the reasonable ways. I think this is also terrible. I don't think record is any indication of if a team is good or not. I think points scored is way more of an indication of a team's strength, because record can be manipulated, or bad luck, or players get injured, or a manager forgets to set their lineup, or intentionally doesn't set their lineup and they lose a game and they're like, oh shit, sorry. I'm 0-13 and now I'm going to get the 101. I guess the worst way to possibly do it would be just a straight up legitimate, only completely random lottery for every team. That would be totally unfair and not fun. So worst record is by far the worst way. The next worst way is of reasonable ways. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase. Of the reasonable methods, worst record is the worst. The second worst would be losing in the toilet bowl. Assuming everyone's trying to play to win, at least losing the toilet bowl was a team that not only was probably pretty bad, but they also lost every game in the toilet bowl. So they seemingly earned the right to the 101. But again, that opens the doors for teams to start intentionally tanking and losing matchups. And that's not fun. To me, it's not fun when teams are incentivized to intentionally lose. Now, yes, of course, it's good to know how to better your team for the future by losing, but still, I don't think that's fun for anybody, especially when it could influence playoff teams and what have you. The next is the next system I think here is the least max points for method, which is at the end of the season, teams 7 through 12 get ordered by their least max points for, which in Sleeper will put together on a weekly basis what your points would have been had you set an optimal lineup, including your starting lineup, your bench, your taxi squad, your IR, everything. So there is no dodging this format. If you want to outright tank and lose matchups, it does not help you, because all that matters is the team that would have scored the most points, the least amount of points over the course of the season, will be granted the 101. Team who would have scored the second least fewest amount of points would be the 102, and so on and so forth. So the only way to truly tank this system is to trade players away. And that's good. I guess it's a good method, because now you're tanking by virtue of making other teams actually stronger, and you're actually weakening your team versus just outright throwing matchups. This is probably the most fair way if you're playing in a degenerate league, a high stakes league, or a league with people you don't really know too well or don't even know in person. It should always be least max points for only. It's not a perfect system, but it's probably the most fair and the best system. But what I like to do is a hybrid between the two. So in both of my leagues, or actually in my league, it's your least max points for decides about 60% of our lottery balls you can earn. So the team who comes in has the least amount of points scored over the course of this, least max points for over the course of the season, gets the most lottery balls. Call it 6 out of 30 or something like that. 6 out of 27, or 20. I forget how many. And then the second lowest gets 4, the next lowest gets 3, etc. And then our consolation bracket also gives people the right to earn more lottery balls. So it incentivizes people to continue to set their best lineups and try to win games, because if you win a game in the consolation bracket, you have a chance to earn 2 more lottery balls, then 4 more lottery balls, etc. So one, it disincentivizes outright selling off of all your assets like a least max points for format does, which helps maintain some parity. And 2, it gives people something to play for. So you can still week 15, 16, 17, you're in the consolation bracket, your season's over. You can say, man, if I can just win one matchup, I bump my chances at getting that 101, earning that 101 in the lottery up from a 30% chance to a 40% chance. So I'm going to at least set my best lineup and try to make waiver acquisitions and whatnot. Next, we're going to move on to the timing of the rookie draft. I think before the rookie draft, you're a psycho. Just plain and simple, you should. Before the NFL draft, you're a psycho. You should wait and see at least what teams draft which players in which rounds, because draft capital helps inform fantasy production more than any other input into the models that I've seen and the model that I use, which is more of like a comp model. But there's after the NFL draft, like right after the NFL draft, which I think is the most fun and most popular, which we just talked about, or close to the NFL season. I think rookie draft season in May and June is the best time because it gives everyone a chance to get excited for something in the offseason. It gives everyone something to do, gives everyone an event, and it helps break up the offseason while still rewarding active management and active research. Whereas close to the NFL season, obviously, it's going to reward the managers with the top picks more, which maybe need it more, but it's less fun because now you have all the information on, hey, the Jaguars named Travis Etienne the starting running back. Oh, I'm going to take him at 103 instead of 106. And yeah, back to the clock time. Rookie draft should always be a slow clock. I think that in Dave's league, we did 3 or 4 years of a fast clock, 15-minute picks. That was fun. I think we had 3 or 4 trades over the course of the first 4 rookie drafts we did. First 3 rookie drafts we did, which was fine. And then the first year we did a slow clock, we had something like 13 or 14 trades, which was so awesome. Of course, people bitched and complained and moaned that it was taking too long. But at the end of the day, it was definitely more conducive to the fact that we have people across different time zones, different work schedules, different work-life balances where they might be married with kids and putting kids to bed, and it's tough to find a time to draft and chat and negotiate a deal. And this was so much better having the slow clock. I totally encourage it. If you haven't tried it, go to a slow clock. All right, only a couple more items to go through. Next year is waivers. I think your waivers should be done using a free agent acquisition budget only. That is basically like a blind auction. Everyone starts with, call it $100 or $1,000 fab. I like to have $0 minimum bids, meaning you don't have to bid anything. And if you tie with somebody else, you both bid on the same player, it just goes to waiver priority. But it should always be free agent acquisition budget, blind auction for free agents. You should decide when your waivers are going to run. Like, so in my league, waivers stay closed until July. We have a free agent draft, which is a cool way to add another event to the offseason, and then waivers open weekly until the season starts. In Dave's league, previously, we did waivers opened right after the rookie draft, and they ran every week throughout the offseason. But now we do an auction in his league. So it's like other leagues I'm in, they run once a week. I think that's a good standard is during the offseason, your waivers should either be closed for a period of time or when they open, they should only run weekly. So people don't have to be constantly keeping up with this player just had breakfast with this guy and this player just tweaked his hamstring and this wide receiver is looking good in camp, and they don't have to race to the waivers and make an acquisition that night. They can do their research on a limited basis, put in waiver claims over the course of the week, check their claims the night before the waivers run, and make sure that they all look good. Next one here is the trade deadline. Mid-season, some people like to have a no trade deadline at all, which means you can trade all the way through playoffs. I personally think that's crazy. I would hate the idea of I build a perfect team and you go make 2 trades in week 17 to add Derrick Henry and Mike Evans to your team, and I lose because of that. And I'm like, those weren't even part of they weren't even part of, your team. I couldn't imagine just the Chiefs going out and saying, hey, we're going to trade for Tyreek Hill in week 22 to go get to put him on our championship team because we just lost. That just seems so asinine and crazy. And the fact that it's even an option in fantasy is ridiculous. I do understand that it's a different game and that it does actually make for quicker rebuilds when that's a possibility. When a rebuilder can strip off assets to a contender in week 17, of course, it creates for transfer of wealth a lot quicker. But I think it's ridiculous and I would never do it. But the big rule here is absolutely no vetoes ever. No trades should ever be vetoed. In my opinion, if a trade is ever so bad that it would break the discourse of the league, it's because one manager needs to be taken out of the league. The trade gets unwound, and that manager is kicked because it's collusion. Not because, we don't like that this trade was just a little lopsided and unfair. Like a newsflash, buddy. Trades look bad all the time. 3 years ago, I traded away Kyren Williams for Treylon Burks when Kyren had gotten a few games logged and Burks was injured, and I looked like I robbed the guy blind because Kyren hadn't done shit, but neither had Burks, but Burks was a first-round pick, and it looked like an optically a terrible trade. Well, now look who's laughing. Still me, obviously, because Treylon Burks is the dog. The thing I have here is playoffs. How are they determined? Me and Dave talked about this before, how, in our leagues, it's the top 6 teams make playoffs. In Dave's league, we actually just added that division winners get granted the 1, 2, and 3 seeds. We have three 4-team divisions. So division winners 1, 2, and 3 are seeds 1, 2, and 3. I'm in another league where the top 5 teams are the best 5 teams by record and points scored. And the 6th team is the highest point scoring team of the lowest 7 teams. So it doesn't matter what your record is. If you scored a lot and just got unlucky with matchups, you make playoffs. I play another league where we play a game against the median every week. I don't like it. I know some people swear by it. I think in a really competitive, degenerate league, it's probably the best format for rewarding the best teams. But I don't know, call me a hypocrite, but I do like the randomness or the thrill of, okay, no matter what, I'm facing my opponent and I just have to beat my opponent. I don't need to worry about, I got to score more than 6 other teams, or I got to score more than this, or, oh no, I got a bad beat. That's so unfair. Like, that's unfair. Okay. It's in the end, it usually comes out in the wash. The best 6 teams usually make playoffs. I rarely can think of a time where one team that should have made playoffs didn't make it in any of my leagues, but, the next is your off-season settings. As a commissioner, I like to set up my league in a way that every month or so, there's something to look forward to. So to give you an idea of the schedule of events, the fantasy football season runs from September to December. The trade deadline closes in November. So you have December off from trades, but you're still setting lineups, and fantasy playoffs are ongoing. Fantasy ends in December. January is the actual NFL playoffs, so nothing needs to be done. I keep my league closed for January and February. In March, the league opens. Hooray! We vote on new rules, but waivers stay closed. And then in March, there's also the NFL Combine. Pro days are happening. NFL free agency opens in March. So March ends up being a pretty busy, fun time for the NFL, which opens the door for more trading to happen. We do our lottery in March, so people have their draft picks decided. You can start making trades, but waivers are closed. There's no other events for our league. In April, the NFL draft happens. So again, no other new events for our league. In May is usually when our rookie draft happens. So there's an event. In June is when is kind of like our summer period off. July is when we have our free agent draft occurs, and then waivers open after that. August, you have the NFL preseason and training camps, and then September again is when the season starts up. So that's kind of how the flow of my off seasons tend to go. As a commissioner, you can figure out, do we want to keep it closed until April or May? Do you want to keep it 6 months open, 6 months closed? Do whatever you want. If you want to keep it open year round, feel free. If you want, as soon as Super Bowl ends, trading to open up again, or as soon as the fantasy Super Bowl ends, you want trading to open back up, by all means, go ahead. I like giving all the managers in my league a break, myself included, because this consumes me for a large chunk of the year, and it's nice to have some time off. So yeah, that's it for all the settings I can think of. The last thing I would say is have some extracurriculars. Do some fun things to get the engagement up in your leagues. At the end of the day, as the commissioner, you are the engine that makes your league go. You are responsible for the energy level you want others to bring to your league, and find ways to reward that, or find ways to make that exciting. So one thing we do is the lowest scoring team of every week has to send a beer chug video to the group chat. And it's a fun way for some of the people who maybe don't know each other that well to get to know each other better. It's a good way to kind of poke fun at each other, to add some personality to the league, to check in, make sure you're checking your team, incentivizes people to make sure they're setting their lineups. Shouldn't have to in a league, but it's a good proper process. Now, again, I get that it shouldn't be maybe it's not the most sensible thing to do in Dynasty, because tanking is a strategy, or having a bad team is a strategy that you could be intentionally trading away your older good players for younger unproven players that aren't playing yet, so your teams aren't going to score a lot. I get it, but this is a fun way to get everyone engaged in the league. Have virtual hangouts, like every now and then. Just hey, we're popping on for a little live FaceTime for the game. Anybody want to join? Do power rankings. I write up power rankings every 4 to 6 weeks for Dave's league for fun. It gives me a reason to, in a roast style commentary, talk shit about all the teams in the league, talk shit about the managers, get some banter up, get people talking in the chat. That opens the opportunity for people to realize, oh shit, Joe said I have no running backs. I didn't even really notice I only have 2 that are healthy and 2 that are injured. Maybe I should make a trade. It helps stir up some commotion, gets people going. come up with side bets or side pots. I know some leagues do a side bet pot where everyone puts in like kind of like skins, where if you can outscore me for the week, even though we're not facing each other, it's a $10 bet, or wager, betting on other matchups in the league. I guess that could create opportunities for collusion, but I don't know. That could be it. Have weekly awards. I mentioned this earlier. Pay out the top team every week who scores the most points or wins by the biggest landslide, etc. Have an event to get everyone together besides just the draft. Have a poker night. Have a golf out. Like my league has a golf outing. It's a reason to get everyone together. That's usually when we issue our punishment, and it's also when we start our rookie draft, usually at the golf outing. So, these are all ways. If I didn't think of anything, please let me know. If you're starting to start up, I don't need any more leagues, but I'm happy to take a look at your draft boards. As always, remember, we do have the Discord. The link should be in the bio and the show notes. But yeah, Discord, it's popping. There's 11 people in Discord. It's really not popping yet, but I'm hoping over the course of time we eventually start filling it out as the show takes off. But as always, love you guys, and I'll see you on the next one.